Welcome back to the Lou Perez Podcast. My name is Lou Perez, and I'm happy to report that right now you can order my book. That's right, I wrote a book. It's called That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore, on the death and rebirth of comedy. Follow the link in the description or head over to Amazon and search for Lou Perez, That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore. If you want other options on how you can buy my book, please sign up for my newsletter at thelouperez.com. You could also join my community at thelouperez.locals.com. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast. And if you could leave a 5-star review, that would be amazing. Whether you're a long-time listener or a first-time, 5-star reviews are lovely. If you're looking for other ways you can support me, you can do so by supporting my sponsors. If you're into CBD products, please check out PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Use promo code LOU to get 25% off purchases over $75. And if you like cold brew, check out Black Organic Cold Brew at www.blvckbrew.com and use promo code LOU for free shipping. All right, let's go. I'm very excited to be joined by my next guest. He is the editor of Spiked Magazine, my favorite magazine, Mr. Tom Slater. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks for having me, Lou. How you doing?
Well, yeah, about that. So this is the earliest recording that I'm ever doing, and it might be the last one that I ever do for my podcast. It is 7 a.m. for me, Eastern time. And Tom, it's like, I don't even know. I don't even know if you have time in England right now where you are. You're in such a wonderful time zone. And the reason why I did this is normally, so I had stuff happening during the day. So I thought, oh, maybe I can get this in beforehand. And we were scheduling for a while. And with my kids, my normal routine is I'm woken up around 4:30 a.m. or 5 a.m. On a great day, it's like 5:30 a.m. And so I was thinking that's probably what's going to happen. And then wouldn't you know, on the morning that I book a 7 a.m. recording, my son sleeps so well that I could have made it till maybe past 7 a.m. with some sleep. So that's where I am.
Terrible timing on my part, but
no, it's not. Yeah. What do you have a morning routine? What is your morning routine like?
Oh, this is a good question. I just get up, read the news, and go to work. Essentially, I mean, at the moment, it feels like I'm not sure if you feel the same way, but it feels like it's been impossible to switch off what's going on in the world for what feels like about the past 5 years. It's just been one thing after another, and particularly being in the business that I'm in, you're just constantly glued to it. But no, that's certainly the thing. It's first thing in the morning, see what's going on in the world, see who's invaded whom, and work out how we're going to respond to it.
Yeah, and so you've been an editor now for how many months so far?
It must have, what was it, last September, October? I honestly can't remember. It feels like an age ago, given how much has changed since then. But about
yeah. So not only are you just wired and completely tuned into everything that's happening, but then you also have added pressure on yourself to be able to have to oversee just a whole stable of other people who have to be tuned in to everything that's going on.
Yeah, and cursed at living interesting and now quite dangerous times, it seems like. But at the same time, what a time to be talking about what's going on in the world. It's endlessly fascinating, even though it has been in a sort of grim sense, shall we say, over the course of the past month.
Yeah, and I don't know if you agree with me on this, but sometimes what I find is what's even more interesting than what's happening in the world are the responses to what's happening in the world. And it could be anything from, something very big like Russia invading Ukraine to something that happened, the other night with Will Smith smacking, Chris Rock in the Oscars. I'm always amazed at just all the different permutations when it comes to human behavior and how they will respond to the weirdest stuff that's happening.
Yeah, the Will Smith thing, I think, was a good example of how we do live under this like tyranny of takes. It doesn't matter how big or how small the story is. discourse must happen. There must be commentary. There must be endless kind of permutations of different kind of points. And that was a really good example of that. I mean, that slap had barely landed before people were saying that this was, a welcome revival of honor culture in one corner, or it was another, the reaction to it proved that anti-blackness still, kind of stains American society and discourse or whatever. Something as simple as a bloke slapping another bloke because he took the mick out of his wife has to have so much more significance, it seems like. So that was definitely a fascinating one.
And it's also, we're living in a time, obviously where we all have email, we all have phones, we get to share stuff, right away. I didn't watch the Oscars. I wasn't planning on watching the Oscars. I didn't find out until like maybe the day of or the day before that it was going on. I, just wasn't interested in it. And I went to bed early because I knew I was going to be up very early in the morning. And when I woke up, my friend from Los Angeles had texted me and said, you might have to rewrite your book because of the Will Smith, Chris Rock thing. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? And for those of you who aren't familiar, I wrote a book called That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore about comedy. And I'm like, oh God, what, am I going to have to, write, a few more 100 words for this? And then I just watched the clip and it's like, oh, my friend and the world has forced this upon me in a way. It's like, in a way, they've slapped me with this friggin' thing. Yeah.
No, you're the real victim of all this. I can see it. I mean, it was amazing. I was almost surprised taking a step back from it, just how huge it was. Because that morning, I got up at about 5:30 a.m., something thereabouts, because I was doing this radio stint I do a couple of times a month where I'm just kind of sat in with the host for the full spate of the show, just sort of chipping in on things. And this became the main story. There's war in Europe, there's cost of living crisis here, there's all these different things. But it was just, there was something about that story which was just irresistible, wasn't it? And I think whilst partly it's just the spectacle of this outrage happening at an award ceremony that we'd all switched off from because it becomes so boring and turgid. But also because, it has to mean something, it feels like, as well, inevitably, which is something that's, even with something as kind of obvious and explainable as that, seems creepy.
Yeah. And I lent my my artistic sensibilities and made a TikTok where I made a TikTok. I just said the gist of it was, if anybody wants to go see it, it was just, when it comes to defending your woman, it's a really smart move to defend her against men you can beat up. Because I've in the past I've we've all been to bars with our girlfriends and had to stand up to men who are being jerks, and you never do research on them. You have no idea who these guys are, what martial arts they know, or anything like that. You're getting into dangerous territory. But Will Smith, I mean, we have decades and decades of Chris Rock material, one of the greatest comedians to ever live, not much of a fighter, at least as far as I know. So I think Will chose wisely. I think a lot of people were pointing that out. I think a lot of people said if it wasn't Chris Rock, if it was The Rock, maybe it would have been a very different response on Will's part.
Yeah, Chris's cousin D. No, it was funny that, especially because that response you saw from some kind of conservative corners of Twitter, which was to sort of say that's what I would have done and all this sort of thing. First of all, missed the fact that this was a joke at an award ceremony. America has this tradition of roasting at these things. It's not. It's a slight overreaction, but also because if you're looking for an avatar of kind of traditional values and standing up for your the Pinkett Smiths are not where you go to for that kind of thing. So.
Yeah, and that's and that's another element to this where it's like I have absolutely no interest in the life of the Smiths, but now in order for me to even understand some of the commentary coming out, I'm like, okay, what's going on? Are they polyamorous? Was it cheating? And it's like, why again? It's being forced upon me, Tom. It's being forced upon
you. You can't get away from it.
Yeah, but I think after a few, obviously there were, a lot of my fellow comedians talking about, oh, this is bullshit. Like the idea that I'm going to have to worry about being hit because I make a joke, and I could understand that But I think like with a few more days removed from the actual incident, I look back and I'm like, I think Will Smith is obviously going through something. It doesn't seem, that doesn't seem like the actions of a reasonable person, a calm, cool, collected guy who has, you would think that has his whole life in order. It seemed like there was something really going on. I did not watch his acceptance speech, which I heard just adds a whole other element, a whole other layer to the absurdity, where after slapping Chris Rock, he won for Best Actor and then gave an acceptance speech where I think love and light were talked about.
Yeah, he kind of presented it as with the film in which he plays the Williams sisters' father, someone who stuck up for his family, and that's something which I intend to do as well. I have to say the thing that really struck me was there was this clip that did the rounds. I think it was like the Vanity Fair after party or something like that, where Will Smith's there, like sort of performing one of his songs, one of the big hits, I can't remember which one. And then what really cracked me up was just the kind of slightly wary way in which people were sort of swaying around him, like slight distance. There was a weird atmosphere afterwards. It was like this huge thing that happened, but no one knew how to respond to it. But I call me old-fashioned. I'm surprised that no one just said, you have to leave now. I thought that was the thing. Yes, if you slap someone, you got to get out. I don't know. Not the Academy.
It's like, look, we're not saying you can't come back next year, but right now you have to get out of here. It's such a it's not a glitch in the matrix or anything like that, but it shows just such a breakdown of norms, and just norms, what we're used to, what we're used to seeing, a night that's supposed to be glamorous, and all that just turns into I don't know, just a wacky thing. Has anything happened like that to at the BAFTA awards? As Peter O'Toole, ever hop up on stage and
it's hard to remember because people have quite short memories about these things. People get very shocked about things happening in the present, and then there's always someone who kind of points out 20, 30 years ago, someone threw a glass at someone or whatever. Nothing immediately comes to mind. I'm sure something like this happened. I mean, you've got a lot of famous drunk actors together. Something's going to happen every so often, surely.
Yeah. Well, since Chris Rock is a comedian, I know that you're a big fan of comedy, and one of the coverage that I really enjoy in Spiked is definitely on the comedy beat, which I thank you very much for given me some space to write about it. We keep talking about sort of like the state of comedy. What do you see it as? How are we doing on the comedy front?
Well, it feels sort of dreadful, doesn't it? But I think there's two very different conversations in the UK and the US. Because in the US, obviously, there's a lot of. I mean, you think about the whole Dave Chappelle Netflix scandal. Bill Burr getting in trouble for X, Y, Z, and there being this genuine, woke comedy being something which is a growing force and seems to be trying to take down the kind of more traditional no holds barred type approach. The UK feels much more stifled, I think, just because for whatever reason, comedy has been sort of dominated by quite a kind of middle class, politically correct set for quite a while. They weren't quite as bad as they are now previously. They used to be a bit more interesting. But comedy in the UK is very dominated by kind of the BBC. It's very much dominated by kind of a particular type of almost like private school, went to Oxford, goes up to Edinburgh and gets their break, gets a Radio 4 show, which is like a big radio station here, which is very kind of middle class audience. So it's very dominated by that sensibility. And so the outliers are a little harder to find, if you see what I mean. And kind of control over is a little bit more stifling. What's interesting is that even within something like the BBC, there's been a recognition that this has kind of gone a little bit too far, that particularly after the EU referendum, and you would just have kind of nightly, comedy panel shows in which just really lame jokes about they're all just lizard-brained idiots or whatever, being recycled over and over again. Actually, like the Director General of the BBC has made these various kind of showy statements about how we need to take on woke comedy and we need to have more diversity of opinion. So there's an attempt to correct, if you like. But I think the problem the UK has, it's like the comedy industry and the thing that really dominates what gets out on the airwaves is structurally very woke to begin with, in a way that there's just not, to my mind, in terms of someone of that kind of stature, there's not an equivalent to a Chappelle or a Burr or someone like that who is kind of uncancelable and huge. Here, if you're a big comic, you're either quite politically correct or you're just apolitical. That tends to kind of be the balance. But you do get a sense that things are changing. And there are some people who are putting in good work to try and kind of open the Overton window, to stretch the Overton window a little bit, I guess.
Yeah, over the years, when I've followed British comedians, one thing that I noticed is that it seems like, I don't know, I'm not saying this is for every British comic, but at some point in the show, the British comic like breaks the fourth wall and talks about how important it is to be able to make jokes and joke about things you're not supposed to joke about. And it's sort of I've seen it a number of times. Jimmy Carr had a really great bit where it's like he's gonna deliver progressively more fucked up jokes, and he's letting everybody in on it, and he's able to to nail that because he's so good at it. But I was sort of, it just made me think, I was like, man, I wish we could just get back to a time where it's, instead of talking about, oh, you should be able to do this, you just do it. Yeah. And it's just, that's what you're supposed to do, Yeah.
I know. I think that's a really good point, actually, because first of all, there's a danger that, I don't even want to say anti-woke comedy, but like anti-woke comedy in and of itself sometimes makes me cringe a little bit, just because it becomes, first of all, I don't just want to hear my own views, reflected back to me anyway. It's supposed to be a little bit more, creative than that. But also, as you say, you spend so much time kind of making your case as to why you should be able to make this joke that you don't actually get to the joke. I even think like Chappelle's last special, where there's a lot of, it's not necessarily throat clearing, and it is still very funny, but he almost spends so much time addressing the issue and almost providing his kind of pro-trans bona fides by talking about, I know trans people and all the rest of it. It does get in the way of the comedy a little bit. The problem is it's kind of become a bit of a necessity in a really strange way, insofar as it's almost like these comedians, as being a comedian yourself, the job is not to be some sort of political spokesman, but it has become that in one way, shape or form. Either you've got more high status opinions and you feel the need to just express them, even though a comedy club is hardly the forum in which to do that necessarily naturally, or you feel like you have to almost prepare people if you're going to say something even slightly against the grain. So yeah, I think a much healthier situation is not where we've got a thriving woke scene and a thriving anti-woke scene. It's just where people just do comedy. Sometimes it's political, sometimes it's not. Might be left wing, might be right wing, but yeah, we do run the risk, I think, of just getting caught into it, just becoming another theatre of the cultural war. In not a very easy way, I think.
Yeah, I wonder if a lot of it has to do with this whole idea of comedians being truth tellers. You hear that all the time. You've been, oh man, comedians are truth tellers, and it's like, sometimes I guess, but also there's a hell of a lot of comedy and lying and bullshitting, but also it's sort of like, if you keep hearing like, oh, comedians are truth tellers in an age where there's so much bullshit, then you're going to be turning to comedians, please be the truth teller. And a lot of comedians aren't, like you said, are pretty apolitical, aren't necessarily looking to be the truth tellers and all that. And it's like, I might have wonderful observations about going to the supermarket and blah, blah, blah. It doesn't necessarily mean that I have, incredible insights when it comes to, war or genocide or anything like that.
No, I think that's right. And I think there's an element of just sort of putting too much pressure. Because obviously people make the points quite rightly that, historically it was always the kind of jester or the comedian or whatever who had that extra bit of license. And you do have to be a little bit concerned when you just can't joke about things, when you can't just kind of let off a little bit of steam about issues, where you can't just play around with them. Not necessarily even just talking about them earnestly, just taking the piss, as we'd say in England. That's when that happens. It's an alarming thing, and it undermines the status of the comedian. On the other hand, you don't want to layer too much pressure on them. It's like Dave Chappelle must keep making trans jokes, otherwise, that is kind of the the approach that we're stumbling into. And also, whilst there's a lot of political comedy that I like and have liked over the years, but there's also a lot of it which is just dreadful on all sides. Being the truth teller can, someone like a figure like Bill Hicks, I think his influence has, in some respects, just created loads of people in a kind of quite irritating pound shop imitation of that, where they just kind of just sound off about X, Y, Z and think that that's the kind of comedy routine. So there's a, I think ultimately the thing that we're dancing around here is the fact that comedy is supposed to be funny. And
right.
That seems to be the thing that's we've gotten away from as it's become more political, I guess.
Yeah, no, that is a way to put it. My wife, she's been to just countless shows that I've done, and yeah, the amount of times that she's like, oh my God, like she feels really bad for the comedian, not because they're not doing well, but what they're putting out there. It's like, oh my God, are you okay? Like you just seem either, and it's like if when it comes to dudes, it's sort of like the Bill Hicks knockoffs. It's like, oh, you seem like very angry and cynical, and maybe three steps from hanging yourself. Or when it comes to a lot of female comics, will have like this insanely self-deprecating, material where it's like, oh my God, are you okay? Like, are you medicated? Are you trying to get medicated right now? And I guess it takes a long time in comedy, or like in any art form, to find your voice and to build up your skill set. So I could see early on, like trying to do, following in, down similar roads as comedians that you like. I often it happened the other night when I was performing. At some point, I think for like 5 minutes, I just became George Carlin, and there was no. And someone actually pointed it out. It was almost like I don't know. Well, like my back kind of like hunched over, and I started talking like this. Hello, yeah, and so. I don't know where I am right now talking, but Sunday.
That's one thing that I think is becomes really, it's where things get tricky, is when any form of art just becomes so overtly politicized. Like art can be political of any form, high art, lower culture, comedy, literature, whatever. It can be political, but if the very act of doing it becomes a kind of political act or sort of another front in the culture, well, you just end up in trouble. And I think even on our side of the argument, who are obviously more pro free speech and don't want to see comedians getting cancelled and the rest of it, you can end up kind of presenting almost a too worthy kind of stature of the comedians, as if to say, like the truth teller thing, sometimes it is important that they are speaking truth to power and
right.
taking down the establishment, which can definitely be true. Of course it can. But sometimes offensive humor is just offensive humor. What's funny about it is that you're not supposed to be saying that. Like one of the most incredible comedians I've ever seen live is like Jerry Sadowitz, who is a Glaswegian comedian. He was born in New York, I think. And his whole routine is just painfully, almost toxically offensive. Like it's disgusting. But he's very fated in the kind of, interestingly, he's very fated by the kind of same BBC comedy set people that I've mentioned previously. He just never records anything. You have to go and see him live. And what's funny about that is not because it's a wry critique of anything in particular. It's just that he's saying the most outrageous things you could possibly imagine, one joke after another for 90 minutes. And that's what's so bracing about it. He's got no agenda, as far as I can particularly tell. So I think that, we can sometimes get ourselves into a bit of a corner when we present kind of comedy, offensive or otherwise, as some sort of like great, noble, important pursuit. It's good in and of itself if you like comedy and you like art, if we're going to put it that way. And I think it's important to bear that in mind, I guess.
Yeah. For free speech defenders, you'll often hear, I may not agree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. And then some shit comedian says something that's just not funny and disgusting. You're like, oh fuck, I have to die for this guy. Like I have to die for this joke. Like, can I die for a well-crafted, hour-long, comedy special? But there's something. It's really interesting. I'm not familiar with that comedian, but you said you're only able to see this stuff live, like he doesn't record it. And now we're living in in a time where the norm is giving basically seemingly all of you, the performer, to the public. So every comedian even some of the most successful comedians around have podcasts. So no, they're giving hours and hours of material, often for free, to a public, and then they're appearing on shows and they're performing live and they're putting out albums. It's I don't know. It seems like it can be difficult, I think, to produce to produce all that work, be interesting and original, and then also not be judged based on every little thing that you do. Because you could have a comedian, decades of experience, and then he goes on a little, a Twitter thread, and people are like, you got to get rid of this guy. And it's like, well, wait a minute. You're judging him by that little 140 characters or whatever we're at now.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I mean, especially because, as you say, like, podcast has become such an important medium for comedians, and it's so crucial. But especially given the fact that comedy has become such a target of cancellation and such a kind of focus of the culture war, it's just endless reams of material. It's like when they were trying to go after Joe Rogan, they must have had literally thousands of hours of material through which they could possibly get him on. But there is a weird thing where there's just not an appreciation of what it is that comedy is, that it exists in a particular context. Now, obviously, that's easy to see when you're in the confines of a comedy club or a theatre or whatever. But at the same time, it's almost like we now hold comedians and even just celebrities, just anyone, to the same standards that you would a kind of elected official whose words generally mean something if they hold forth on transgender issues or the war in Ukraine or whatever it is. It means something. But it's like everyone's their own little politician now. I just don't know why we've come to that particular point. There's just no appreciation of the fact that ultimately comedians are, as with anyone else, are going to talk about and joke about issues. And they're often not going to be serious when they talk about these things. Just that simple point seems to pass a lot of people by, it feels like. The idea that so many jokes or quips are taken seriously. It's you want to say to the person, like, do you really believe? But I guess it was Jimmy Carr had a joke about was about the Holocaust or something that offended some people. And the people that it offended, or at least the people who were vocal about it and willing to go after him, it's like, were you really offended, or is this ammunition in some end game that you want to see? And I guess that might be like the cynicism, showing. Yeah, I mean, Jimmy Carr's a good example of just how it does feel like the world's changed, because he is one of those people who's just made there's a couple of them in the UK, him and Frankie Boyle's another one, a Scottish comedian, who I think is probably less well known in America than maybe Jimmy Carr might be, but who sort of made, in the sort of early mid 2000s, a big mainstream career out of being quite offensive, in a kind of sick joke way, kind of in a kind of really kind of harsh one line. It's not particularly political or whatever, but those kinds of slightly grim humor. So for people to respond in the way that they did to that particular joke he told, I thought was really quite strange. The other thing that was strange about it, I'm not sure if this was picked up much in the US, is that our own government intervened in that discussion. Very, very weird. So our culture secretary, who is in the process of putting this piece of legislation through Parliament, which would put more pressure on social media companies and various different tech firms to basically filter out different forms of offensive content. Their term is legal but harmful. It's very Orwellian.
Wow.
Basically said that what we're looking at the moment is to try and make sure that this can't happen again, that Netflix wouldn't be able to get away with this. And that's one thing I always say, that as much as Americans might think that your culture war is more intense, of course, but in terms of the sort of just casual discussion of state censorship here in the UK and in Europe in general, it's just dreadful. You wouldn't believe the sort of things politicians come out with in this stuff.
Yeah, when I was writing my book and just looking back at previous incidents of comedians getting fucked by their government, it was unreal. I mean, in Scotland, I mean, it seems like you have like agents of the state going through social media and looking for thought crime, and they're gonna, if they don't DM you, they're gonna knock at your door to to punish you for these thoughts. Yeah, you guys are it doesn't take much bravery in the United States to speak one's mind, at least compared to other countries out there. And how do you guys do it, especially at Spiked, because you guys aren't afraid to take on every I don't even want to say hot button issue, but like nuclear issue that's going around. I had Libby Emmons on an earlier episode. She's from the Post Millennial, and they publish out of Canada. And Libby's American, so she works out of I believe Brooklyn. And I asked her, since it's going out through Canada, like, do you have to censor? And she's like, oh yeah, like they need to find words of, ways of expressing stuff with transgender people and all that won't get it dinged by censors. Are you guys in a similar boat with that?
It's not quite as bad as all that. I mean, what's interesting, I think, is that obviously in the UK we have hate speech laws, we have terrible libel laws, we have all these different things, which obviously every publication, not less the hate speech thing. I mean, you have to be pretty extreme to get bothered by that too much, I suppose. But in terms of, there's various kind of legal things that you have to worry about. If you're in broadcast media, we have a broadcast regulator, all these different things which put restrictions and kind of the dampeners on a lot of free expression and all the rest of it. What's interesting is that for us, aside from the kind of, the backlash you might get on social media or in the mainstream media, if we take a particular position in quite a forthright fashion, the day-to-day thing we have to worry about is from over there, it's big tech. So if we're, for instance, writing about something like the Leah Thomas situation, we've got a particular author who's making a particular point about that issue. How we word those tweets could be the difference between our account getting suspended and not. Similarly with Facebook, although it's not quite as bad on that particular issue, that's the thing on a day-to-day basis, aside from making sure that you just uphold the used levels of accuracy and you make sure that you're not saying anything that isn't untrue or defaming people or whatever. That's the thing that actually focuses our minds a lot on a day-to-day basis, interestingly. Obviously, there's the kind of general cultural issue of people clamming up around certain issues, and you do feel like we often at Spike feel like that we're kind of first out in front on a lot of those particular cultural war issues because there is a nervousness about talking about those things. But kind of more formally, and I think this speaks to how significant the whole big tech censorship issue is, that's the thing that we're often focusing on day to day. It's not necessarily what's on the statute book in the UK or how that might affect how we discuss issues.
Yeah, when it comes to the culture secretary, how does one become a culture secretary? Is there a test? Because I mean, well, just the idea of a culture secretary, especially what you guys are dealing with, where traditional English culture and history is consistently under attack. I mean, when I see people writing about decolonizing English, which doesn't make any fucking sense because no, the English were the colonized. You can't, it doesn't make any sense. It's sort of what constitutes British culture, English culture, or what's acceptable culture to begin with.
It's a funny position in government that it's often called the kind of fun job because it's the sort of thing you get to run around, because it also includes sports and things like this, culture, media, and sport. But the current occupant of that office, who is actually a kind of best-selling novelist as a background, she's also a Tory MP and all the rest of it. She's called Nadine Dorries. She's really taken to the kind of censorship aspect of this. So she intervened, obviously, in the Jimmy Carr discussion. There's this bill which is currently going through Parliament called the Online Safety Bill, which would put these requirements on social media companies to have a kind of duty of care to restrict what they call legal but harmful speech. And it's funny because she's a good example, actually, of how, and I'm sure this is very true in America as well, and I've seen some examples of it, even the kind of nominally like anti-woke right are really snowflakey about other stuff. So she was a bit of a culture warrior. She used to, when she took her current position, people were kind of pointing to old tweets where she was talking about how, quote, like lefty snowflakes are ruining comedy, the sort of person who would get very agitated about a statue being toppled, all that kind of stuff. But Jimmy Carr makes a joke, or there's information out on the internet is deemed to be misinformation or whatever, and then suddenly all of that just completely melts away. So yeah, it's a funny old job, but I think particularly at the moment it's just kind of become to mean censorship.
Yeah,
one way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I guess being in the States and me being libertarian or anarcho-capitalist. I don't know. We have a lot more extremes in the U.S. It seems like, which I like. I think go extreme, baby. Go for it. Whereas when I hear like conservative, in England, a conservative in England, it's a very different conservative than a conservative in the United States. So even with that, it is interesting to see, the spillover where you would think like, oh, one party is 100%. You would think one party is 100% no censorship, and the other party is maybe some censorship or going all the way. But as you explained, like that's not the case.
No, definitely not. And there's a lot. I mean, it's difficult because on the one hand, I think you've got to give the current government some credit, and a stress some, for recognizing that the free speech issue is an issue. They've talked a lot about cancel culture. They've talked a lot about the issue of freedom of speech on university campuses, which is it's similarly chronic problem in the UK as it is in the US. But at the same time, everything they do in practice just pushes in the other direction. Either their attempts to sort these things out are quite feeble, and it just amounts to one of them writing an article in a newspaper or going on a broadcast around us and kind of talking about this issue in a really lame way. We go to war with wokery and all this sort of stuff. Just makes our side of the argument look a bit bad. That's a slightly cheap point. Or they're pushing in the complete opposite direction. They're trying to criminalize forms of speech on the internet, or they're going after Jimmy Carr. So it's a difficult one. It's something which I've been surprised and cheered then that a lot of these issues that we at Spiked have been talking about for a long time, freedom of speech, identity politics, all of these things which we see as really crucial, have come more to the fore of British parliamentary politics, and the Tories and this particular government have played a role in that. But in practice, they're just dreadful, and there's no two ways around that, unfortunately.
Yeah, one of the things that I love about Spiked is the unexpected, in that I know that if I go to Spiked, and everybody should go there right now, spiked-online.com, I believe it is. You're gonna get takes that you don't expect to see. And one of the things that a recent one that I really enjoyed was I forget who wrote it, but it was about heterosexual queers.
Yes.
That I don't know if you had a hand in editing that.
This was with Gareth Roberts, who's a very good commentator, and also by trade has kind of written various things for kind of books and TV shows and things like that. So he's a fascinating phenomenon, the heterosexual queer.
The heterosexual queer, and it's can you explain it? I don't think I'll do it justice.
No, I'll try. I mean, it's, as far as I understand it, it's that there's been an increase in essentially heterosexual people claiming the mantle of queer, and it's hard to work out on what basis. It might be because they're just how they kind of present and dress is a little bit different. Their lifestyle's a little bit sideways. It's hard to kind of guess. In some cases, these people might be non-binary, I guess is part of the discussion around this. But for all intents and purposes, in a heterosexual relationship. But I think the thing that Gareth really touches on there is just the way in which there's just been a desperation to kind of claim this from a certain type of kind of middle class, actually quite sort of milquetoast individual, and how so much of that just speaks to how, we talk about and rightly so, about the various injustices, both historical and present, experienced by, people with different backgrounds, sexualities, whatever. But at the same time, it's just become the point at which it becomes an identity is the point in which you really get in trouble, because also people want in on that. Sexual queer thing is probably a good example of that. It's like, I suppose it's like the sexual version of like the sexuality version of like a Rachel Dolezal almost. Yeah. But for whatever reason, it's more acceptable. I'm not sure why.
Yeah, I mean, when I hear all of these different sexual identities or gender, I don't even know if it's considered a gender or sex identity or whatever. I mean, one thing that I'm hoping is that these people are actually having sex, because it to put all that work in, to come up with to define a new word. I mean, I hope you're getting laid, or maybe this is an attempt to, increase the pool of potential, lovers. I don't know, but I was sort of thinking like, I mean, the one good thing about queer is that it just seems so easy. Like you don't have to do anything really, except for identify and just say that you're queer. Because I was thinking about in my own love life, like typically I would date brunettes. Like I liked dark-haired girls, but my wife is a blonde. So maybe that's my queerness right there.
I'm just that was on your own podcast to out yourself like that. It takes some bravery. No, the point about are they having sex is a good one actually, because I'm sure this is a parallel phenomenon. But there's one thing that people have been talking about for a good few years is that younger people, I think in America as well as the UK, are having less sex a lot of the time. It just seems to be something which over time is happening less. They tend to drink less. They tend to do fewer drugs and the rest of it. You get more problems at the extreme still, but it's still kind of on net. It seems to be down. And yet you have that coexisting with this blossoming of identities within this particular. How those two things match up, I have absolutely no idea. Maybe maybe put yourself into a smaller box. You just you kind of niche yourself out of any action. I don't know, but it's very strange.
and if you think about it too, if anybody out there is skeptical about younger people having less sex, they can choose to lie, and yet they did not. So whatever numbers they give,
they could have easily just said, yeah, all the time. Of course,
all the time. I'm having sex right in the middle of this poll. Being able to do that. It's a really interesting phenomenon too when it comes to you have basically infinite selections when it comes to gender, or now that they want to get rid of biological sex, so maybe that'll be a new thing. But when it comes to politics, it's either you're a good person or you're a bad person. Like there's a binary when it comes to ideology or philosophy and all that. But everything else, it's like it's your pick. Just just say whatever you are.
You mentioned the kind of getting rid of biological sex thing, because this is another thing which has been fascinating this week in the UK, and it's been a bit of a parallel with like the Ketanji Brown Jackson confirmation hearings. Right. So this long running kind of fiasco where basically the leaders of the two main political parties, the Conservatives and the Labour Party, constantly stumble over this question about the definition of a woman, or the iteration this week. The reason I bring it up is it's actually quite funny, is that you've had the leader of the Labour Party being unable to answer the question of if women can have penises. And it's just one of those things where I just am fascinated why this has become such a particular issue. Like the Orwellianness of this is really quite strange. It is really kind of 2 + 2 = 5. And yet it seems to me that it would be so straightforward for a politician of any stripe to say there is such a thing as biological sex, but also trans people deserve respect and rights and all the rest of it. It's very straightforward, but the terror of blaspheming against this new ideology is such that they find themselves saying absurd things. And I just thought it's worth raising that it's those kinds of issues are as intense here as they are in the US.
Yeah.
Politicians of all stripes kind of tripping themselves up.
I mean, I remember, back when I was in college, that's, going on 20 years ago, and even, all the way up to recent memory, the idea was, look, there is biological sex and there's gender. Biological is, a binary, and then we have intersex people there. But when it comes to gender, that's where the spectrum is really, really, large and deep and whatever you want to call it. And for a while, I think a lot of people, especially if you're college educated and you want to be a nice cosmopolitan and good to people, you're like, yeah, I can get behind that. And then, like you say, something happened where now you have people claiming that there's no biological sex, and it's like, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, which is, I guess, a way of saying, well, on this thing, you might be a conspiracy theorist, but it's almost like, yeah. It's like, is this, was this intentional? Is it sort of like that mission creep or whatever? It's just little by little. It's like, hey, just accept this little thing. And then, you turn around and now I don't know if I'm a man or not, who can define who's to say what I am?
It's amazing, isn't it? Because there is, in terms of where a lot of these ideas come from, kind of philosophically, there is this desire to kind of disrupt, the kind of pre-existing notions of society and all the rest of it. But what I find quite interesting is that, and this is the sort of thing which I think really demonstrates that it's definitely not some sort of plot or whatever as it's sometimes portrayed. And I know you're toying with that idea, but it's just the fact that the only reason that these ideas are given power and we're talking about them, and that you have someone who wants to be on the Supreme Court of the US, or you've got someone who's vying to be Prime Minister of this country, unable to answer these questions, is not because they believe this stuff. I don't believe for a second that Ketanji Brown Jackson doesn't know what a woman is. Same with Keir Starmer with the Labour Party. We all know that what they really think. The problem is their own cowardice, and it's cowardice to say what you know to be true. And how we got into that position, I have absolutely no idea, especially because the conceivable electoral price one might pay for just pointing out what is obviously true surely would be minuscule. But I think it speaks to how politics in particular is really now a conversation between the political class and like the media elite and business. That's who they're worried about a lot of the time, particularly on these issues, kind of just what Twitter might think about these particular issues. So it's one of those things where on the one hand, it feels like we've gone really far down this rabbit hole, but at the same time, no one really believes this stuff. They feel they need to genuflect to it. It's like a kind of state religion that no one actually really believes in anymore. You still have to go to church on Sunday and you still have to say the things that you're supposed to say, but they don't really mean it. But in that kind of moral cowardice, I guess there's still a lot of problems.
This is the Anglican Church of sex and gender. I think I think you really hit it there with the cowardice. And I mean, now I just want to see, anytime a politician or somebody, running for office, refuses to answer that question or tiptoes around it. I would love for someone to just say, you don't believe this. You do not believe this. Come on. I'm going to let the record show you don't believe this, and then move on to the next thing and just calling, calling that out. And I see so much of that. I think we are in a very unique position where, our careers are built on us saying what we actually believe and putting it out there. And, at least at this point, I think I've been doing all right at this, at this point. I'm sure there's some shit out there that I haven't said, and probably mostly because I wasn't able to craft something that sounded good. Some of my thoughts are probably more caveman grunting, has that feel to it. But yeah, I don't know. What are you working on now? Any fun stuff? I know it's in the afternoon by you. I'm sure you got a lot of emails to open and all that.
No, we've got a big project we're about to announce, but I can't actually say anything about it just yet.
Okay.
But it's taken up a lot of time. But that will people will find out about that very shortly. Beyond that, I mean, it's trying to keep up with everything. Really, I mean, we've got. I just got back from Hungary recently. Was like covering in the run up to their election there, which should be quite interesting. We've also obviously got the war in Ukraine to contend with. Recording our podcast tomorrow and trying to dissect what the hell's going on there. And it just I'm sure people are as bamboozled as we are, where it's kind of it just feels like we're kind of constantly trying to deal with and cover and come to terms with 3 or 4 competing huge crises at the same time, and just trying to find a way through and find an interesting perspective and all of that. So yeah, at the moment it's this project I can't announce, and also just the daily grind, which is getting more and more complicated as history continues to be made in front of us.
Yeah. What if we want to touch upon Ukraine and Russia just for a little bit, and I'm saying this as a person who I have very little information or knowledge about the conflict in the two countries, but this is an example of one of those great events that's happening in the world, where what I find more interesting are the responses to it, especially being in the States and seeing so many people, putting up the, Ukrainian flags, showing solidarity on social media, a lot of, war talk, but knowing that the United States is not going to send troops to Ukraine. We are not going to go to war with Russia because unfortunately, there's so much at stake for the human race to get into a hot war with a nuclear power that is Russia. You guys are closer geographically to what's going on. How do you guys see this playing out? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I suppose the very first thing that I think struck me and struck us when this happened was that I think it really pulled out the rug from under this slight complacency, which had kind of set in a lot of Western countries for a long time, which was essentially that things like this, particularly on our doorstep, were over. If war took place, it was over there, and it was at arm's length. And even if things got really screwed up, the most that we would feel the effect of it would be, say, refugees or something like this. It wouldn't be something which would have a kind of immediate kind of threat to our allies, our way of life, or whatever. There was this kind of sense of like conflict was behind us, and that everything was just on this conveyor belt to more peace, liberal democracy, all the rest of it. And the war, if nothing else, has just made clear that was a slightly ludicrous, very complacent perspective to have, that these things are not settled, that a lot of the lasting kind of antagonisms, even after the end of the Cold War, haven't been sorted out. And it's a difficult one because you mentioned the kind of people putting up, the Ukrainian flag in their bios and all the rest of it. And there's obviously a lot of virtue signaling and a lot of not very useful projecting your own personal politics, or almost a kind of a search for meaning in a far off conflict, which can often be quite unpleasant and also lead to people backing policies that they shouldn't, which could escalate things, draw more powers in a way that would be bad. But at the same time, I think there's also quite clear that what we have here is a country trying to defend its national sovereignty, which I'm surprised how many people who have voiced support for that in the past are slightly more uneasy about. Now, does that mean I think we need World War III? Of course not. That suddenly this should be something where you're seeing a hot war between NATO and Russia. That should be avoided at essentially all costs. But at the same time, there's something this is a significant fight that's going on. I think it is something which involves picking a side to a certain extent. What that means is obviously something that people should talk about. Just going gung ho into it for the sake of it, and because it feels like this is how we're going to sort of recapture some sense of Western purpose, could have very dangerous consequences. But at the same time, I think there's been a tendency, particularly on the American right, I think, to just not quite get that, to almost sort of take Russia's side in a weird sort of way, or to explain away what it's doing. And that I've got a lot of problems with, because I have a lot of sympathy, and at Spikes over the years, we've made a lot of criticisms of, the expansion of NATO, the way in which that has done what a lot of its critics back in the 90s said it would do, insofar as it would bring out the more militaristic and backward and imperialistic elements within Russian politics, and that it could kind of sow the seeds for a conflict such as which we're seeing. But at the same time, Russia is the aggressor here. It does have agency. It is making these decisions. To kind of treat it as like a child who is just lashing out, it's our fault ultimately. I think it's like a bit of a moral evasion, basically. So it's a long way of saying I think that this is a really important conflict. And I think most of us have moved, particularly at Spike, that it is something you need to sort of take a side on in some way, shape or form. But that doesn't mean being, as a lot of people are, so gung-ho about it because of the fact that they spy in this conflict a way to kind of get their moral rocks off, rather than see something that would be best for Ukraine and its people. But ultimately, I'm just left with something that's just so complicated. And it's reopened all these questions that we thought were closed. And that's something which I think everyone across the West is going to have to start dealing with now, if we're going to navigate not just this particular conflict, but what comes after it, basically.
Yeah. I've, as far as commentary goes, I have been pretty disconcerted with people who, say some version of Putin had no choice. He had no choice. He was, and it's like, no, you have choice. He had a choice. He didn't have to do that. He didn't have to, to go in there. It's one that I don't know. It's such an odd foreign policy decision to say that you're coming closer to my border because you want war, so I'm going to bring the war to you.
Yeah.
I just, but I have, again, I'm in an very easy position where I get to comment on this stuff without, my own blood being spilled. Actually, the less that I think about the actual horrors that are going on, obviously the easier it is for me to, to make jokes, sort of like I did. For those of you who are watching the video, you'll see my Ukrainian flag. That's my joke. For my Ukrainian flag, I use a Swedish flag because it's a joke, but I'm able to make that joke because, fortunately, my family is ensconced in our house and we're safe and all that. So I can only imagine what's going on. I don't know if you're Konstantin Kissin. I don't know if you're friends with Konstantin, but he's from Ukraine. He has family there. He's obviously in communication with a lot of what's going on, and that must be tough for sure. So. Yeah,
and it's always worth remembering that whatever take one lands upon, these are people's lives, and this is people's nation, which appears in this parish on a wipe off the map. And that's the other thing, which aside from anything else, the fight they put up has been so inspiring, really quite confronting, and we always just have to remember that the center of all of this is human beings and a nation that's essentially fighting for its own survival. And if that doesn't move people to really think hard about this particular conflict and to put aside maybe some of the intellectual habits they might fall into in relation to this particular question, it's surely this one. The stakes could hardly be higher than in this particular conflict, I think. Yeah, for sure. Well, Tom Slater, editor of Spiked magazine, again, my favorite magazine. I've been honored to appear in the pages, the digital pages of Spiked. They're fantastic. I've been a fan of theirs for so long, and I want to thank you so much for coming on my podcast, and whatever plans you have that you're not allowed to announce. I can't wait to hear about it because I know it's going to be awesome. So thank you, brother. It's high praise indeed, Lou. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for listening. And again, please order my book, That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore, on the death and rebirth of comedy. Just follow the link in the description or head over to Amazon and search for Lou Perez, That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore. And please subscribe to my podcast. Leave a 5-star review. Why not? Sign up for my newsletter at thelouperez.com. And if you want other ways to support my work, you can join thelouperez.locals.com. And of course, be sure to support my sponsors, PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Use promo code Lou for 25% off purchases over $75, and Black Organic Cold Brew, BLVCKBREW.com. Use promo code Lou for free shipping. Thank you.